Hello and welcome to Iron Age Media. Today we'll be talking to Vincent from Vindicated Entertainment. Vincent has created several tabletop RPGs as well as card games, which we'll be discussing in this interview, along with his background in competitive card gaming and where he thinks the broader market is going, as well as some hints on what is coming up from Vindicated Entertainment this year. I hope you'll enjoy. All right, Vincent, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your history with Vindicated Entertainment?
Yeah, so my name is Vincent Baker, not Vincent D. Baker, who also makes some tabletop stuff, but I'm Vincent Baker. I've been doing this for a while. It's essentially I'm already fumbling the intro here, but yeah, I make tabletop games. A lot of people sort of know me for like wanting to do like an anime art style for what I'm doing. I didn't start off necessarily going that way, but I do like a lot of anime, so it was naturally sort of inspiring me. And then as I sort of focus things in, it's come to that. I used to be a former TCG competitive player, where my father actually paid a professional Magic the Gathering player to tutor me how to play Magic the Gathering professionally. So I was going around at the age of 13, traveling to what they had called the Junior Super Series. And I was competing in those, did multiple top eights, top fours, came in second place at one of them. I also worked with Ivan Van Norman, who works for the Darrington Press, who does stuff for Critical Role. I did things with him at Gen Con for his company, Hunters Entertainment, which done Outbreak Undead, Ultra Carbon, a lot of other stuff like that. So I've also I worked with Gearbox for, 2K rather, who does Borderlands. They're doing a community event, and I sort of found my way into their kind of helping them orchestrate an event for them. Unfortunately, the budget was cut before we were able to actually have our games made for that. But we managed to have I managed to work with them on that, which was fun and exciting. And then since then, I'm probably mostly known for my card game Slingers, which I published in 2017. I also have a tabletop RPG called Otherworlds, which is what I like to call future fantasy, but people say science fantasy, but we'll go with that. And some other games that's coming around the corner.
Awesome. Well, man, there's a whole bunch of things I want to ask you about just
Yeah.
on that. First and foremost, okay, I didn't realize, I guess I should have known, but I didn't realize that there was a business of tutoring kids to play Magic the Gathering.
Yeah.
Did
So
you?
my dad's a huge nerd, so
Okay.
he really wanted to celebrate my interest, and so I'm very thankful to my parents for being very supportive. And when my dad saw that I took up interest in card games, which started off as Pokemon, played that for a bit, played Yu-Gi-Oh, TCG a bit, and then Magic for a bit, he really wanted to support that. So he paid someone $20 an hour, and for back in early 2000, that's like $1,000 an hour for
Yeah, right.
today's cash. So it was
That's pretty crazy.
wow. Yeah.
Man, that's interesting. Yeah, I got into the Pokemon craze whenever I was a kid, but that was as far as my trading card game interests went. Fortunately, at least for my wallet, I picked up other more expensive interests as well. Not more, but equally expensive interests.
Oh yeah, TCGs
But
can be expensive, and thankfully,
oh
since
yeah,
my dad was very supportive of me doing that, he definitely funded he basically
hmm
funded everything for it when I was a kid. So it definitely
nice.
helps.
Okay, so this is like a bit of a non sequitur, but you said it was like a junior league. How young were the kids? Was there any lower limit? Do you ever crush any 8-year-olds and make them cry?
Maybe. So the details are a little fuzzy on that one, but
Fuzzy.
I can say the age limit was 15. It was 15 and
Okay.
younger, and I at least did it through my entire. I at least did it when I was 13. I may have done it a little bit earlier, like maybe 11 to 13,
hmm
14, but I definitely remember being 13, and I did at least like 5 or 6 of these events. Um,
Oh, pretty cool.
yeah, and they were big. Like some of them were smaller than others, but I remember the biggest one took up this entire like massive floor. Like if you've been to Gen Con, there's like sort of like that whole area just full of people. Not like the main vendors room, but the one that's like the extra one where there's like people playing board games. It was like a room that size just filled with people in this
hmm
tournament. So it was a wild experience.
Well, cool. So, sorry to get off of your childhood glory in Magic the Gathering. Uh, you said that Spell Slingers was that your first like successful card game? You'd say?
Yeah. So where Spell Slingers came from was my first game was Otherworlds, which is my tabletop role playing game,
Okay.
but it was very hard to show people. Like when I would, I worked for a pop culture store. I managed this pop culture store where we sell anime, video games, video game memorabilia, stuff like that. And I'd constantly tell people because I'm just networking while I'm there. I'm like, hey, I'm a tabletop game designer, and they're like, cool. Can you show me something you've made? And then I tell them about Otherworlds. It's very tough, and a lot of people that sort of more casual, they don't know what the term tabletop RPG even means. So
Hmm.
when you say that, you have to say kind of like, oh, it's something like D&D, and they're like, oh, okay, I kind of get what that means. So it was just very hard for me to kind of show myself as a game designer. So I wanted to make something that was very portable, very fast, very easy to teach anyone. So that's where Spell Slingers came from. It actually was from it was like a very mechanics driven game where it's like, okay, I need this to be easy for me to throw in my bag. I need it to be easy to play. I need the setup to be very quick. I need to be able to show anyone. I need it to not take up much time. So, like for example, like hopefully my boss doesn't watch this, but I at that time I'd bring the game with me, and anytime customers were interested, I'd be like, hey, I can just show you like a quick round of it, and I just show them real quick, and
Hmm.
we'd play it, and it'd be so quick and done with, but they would love it, and then they would be interested, and then they'd jump up and then buy the game and stuff. So, um, it really just was meant to highlight the weaknesses of having a tabletop RPG and to sort of be strong points on other ends of that.
Yeah, I watched. I think you have like a tutorial video as well as like a practice hand, and it's just two people, and it can be played with multiple. But that was something like 7 minutes. Um, I think 7 or 11 minutes to run through the whole thing. So yeah, it looks like a very tight game. Now you said uh, pen and paper RPG, or is it a pen and paper
Yeah,
RPG,
it
or is
is
it
for
okay
Otherworlds. Yeah,
for other worlds? And then you also have Black Paper Moon, which I know
yeah,
you posted
which
about on the site. Now
yeah,
that
that's my most
was,
recent project.
yeah, I was going to say, now that is, um, is that's not fully pen and paper, is it? I thought there were some card decks and some other
So,
stuff that went with that.
so I'm not sure if this is a benefit or a weakness of mine, but I like to do things a bit differently,
Hmm.
and sometimes it can cause confusion, which is a drawback. But it is a pen and paper game. The cards are meant to be like more player aid based cards,
Ah,
and
okay.
yeah, and the what I kickstarted was like a box set. So there's a
Hmm.
box set. You could almost think of it as like a starter box that you would find for other RPGs. But essentially, it comes with a rule book. It comes with player cards for your like pre-generated player characters. It comes with dice, and it
Okay.
comes with some player aid cards. Um, but it was what's weird about it is kind of like what you brought up, and then there's also the thing that I wasn't just kickstarting like a book. It's like a tarot card sized book, like a small book inside this box, and then it's mostly like a box set for the game, as
Hmm.
opposed to just kickstarting like a normal size traditional tabletop RPG.
Yeah. Well, I actually think that, um, especially as players start looking at more things, because I don't know if this is your perception as well, but I feel like in the like 2010s, early 2010s, there was like this board game craze where people discovered that there was something other than, chess, checkers, Monopoly, um,
Yes.
shoots and ladders. And all of a sudden everybody's playing Catan, and then there a few other things started popping up, and then a bunch of just smaller and new board games started coming out of the woodwork. And then it was like, I don't know about you, but for me, I was like, okay, I've got enough games. I don't have enough time to play the ones I have, much less get new ones. So time becomes a real limiting factor.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure. I mean, and the industry is still growing. Like the industry,
mhm,
like you said, it was growing then, and it's projected that it's going to grow billions of more dollars over the next few years.
mhm,
So there's actually like giant corporations looking at that and saying, how can we get a piece of that pie? We're having more video game licenses moving over to board games now. It's just expanding in all ways. So it's very cool in a lot of ways to see how it's expanding and to get more people interested in tabletop games. But part of that and part of what my mission has sort of been starting this year actually is making sure that as it grows, there's sort of a space for sort of like my style of gaming, which is a bit more casual friendly, or kind of like looking at things a bit differently, or having a certain art style that's not really seen a lot in the industry. Because whenever I show people games here, I get really good feedback. Whenever, like, it's very easy for me to get playtesters. It's really easy for me to get groups going. It's very easy for, like, whenever I'm at a con and people are playing, I can tell they're having a really fun time. And there's just certain things, like currently in the tabletop industry, most people, I'm trying to think of how to put this, but they're into a certain type of board game that me and a lot of my friends and a lot of people that I play test with aren't necessarily into. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I'm not like saying like, oh, my way is better than your way. I'm just saying that there's a lot of different aspects to the tabletop space. And I just want there to be like a room for everyone, kind of thing. Cause like, for example, I was at a convention in Greenville and there was another tabletop game designer. And he's like, oh, cool, another tabletop game designer. What's your favorite board game? And I sort of struggled to come up with an answer, and I threw out there, I was like, I don't know. My friends and I have been enjoying playing this game by Cryptozoic called Cartoon Network's Crossover Crisis. And he was like, oh, yeah, no, we don't play anything like that. Like, that's, he just kind of was like, no, that's not really for us. And then his game was all about, like, moving his meeple across this board, and it's very, like, abstract. And then you have to, like, count up the numbers, and it's, like, very, like, they call those Euro games. It's a very certain style of game where it's very like mathematical and crunchy and very, it's not thematic at all. It's like basically the exact like people that like Euro games a lot, tend to not like the themes and style and stuff like that. But that's kind of more what I come at it for, but that's sort of known as being Ameritrash. And then when you make it more,
I've never heard that term before, but that's great.
Well, see,
I'm gonna start using that as a derogatory term, but
well, see now, you can kind of tell how it's a little bit biased to say like, oh, okay,
I know.
in the board game space, we have Euro games and Ameritrash. So and then imagine, and then imagine how much worse that is when you combine Ameritrash with like weeb culture. People think you're below Ameritrash at that point. So so it's like you have Euro games, Ameritrash, Amera weeb trash or something. I don't know. Weeb stuff. So
I'm not going to try and hypothesize what I could come up with, at least not live, or not while the camera's rolling. Anyway, so I have a couple questions. One is, whenever you're looking at trying to find themes for games, or like, do you look for I'm sorry, I'm screwing up the question here. Do you come up with mechanics and then kind of look for themes that might fit them? Or do you kind of get an idea for, I like that style, I like that aesthetic, and then start thinking about mechanics that might complement that?
It's really a mixed bag for me. I find inspiration in a lot of areas. I have people ask me, they're like, Vincent, how do you find inspiration? I'm like, look around you. Like, what makes you excited? Like, just look around and see what's cool to you. And it varies differently. Like Legendaria is one of my less popular games. It's a tabletop RPG that you play through texting on your phone. And and so it's like, it's like D&D, but it's meant specifically to like send text messages to the person running the game, and then they filter out your actions, and then it unfolds as everyone's playing. And what's cool is you can play with people around the world. You can play with people even if they have to go to their job, and then once they get home, they can then send their text. And you get updated occasionally throughout the day about what's going on, what's happening, and then your character can end up in these battles. But what throws people off is whenever they think of something like a role-playing game, they picture everyone being on the same team. It's like you're the adventuring party going into the dungeon, fighting the dragon, whatever. In this, though, everyone's kind of meant to be more of like their own person with their own objectives, and they're not really on a team. And really, it's kind of more like you're out for yourself. And so, another thing. Yeah, and in the tabletop space, there's a lot of people that look down on sort of like the trader mechanic is what they call it, because they want to encourage everyone to be on the same page and not have a trader or anyone that's aggro against them or whatever.
Well, I can empathize with that from, I've played some board games, and like one of the things I started tinkering around with board game design and stuff like that just in my free time. I never did anything serious, but I disliked randomness, and then I really disliked king making, you know,
Hmm.
and so I think that I'm empathetic to that because sometimes you have high time investments,
Hmm.
like especially with a game that you're like sitting down and playing for a couple of hours, and then if you have a traitor mechanic in it, and it's like, okay, well, this person just screwed everyone. It can lead to some bad feelings.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
if you have like lower impact games, I think that's a good place to explore it.
Yeah, and like I said, anything that I talk about is not to say that certain ways of playing games is better than others, or that,
Oh, of course.
yeah, yeah. Just want to make sure that's clear for everyone. But essentially, before I lose my point with Legendaria, because I can get very off the rails. Um, the inspiration for Legendaria came from me trying to figure. A lot of times, if I like a show, I try to think like, how could I make this into a game, even if I never make it into a game. But there's a show called it's like an anime called the Fate series. So you have Fate Zero, Fate Stay Night,
I
Unlimited
think
Blade
I've
Work.
seen a little bit of it.
Yeah. So the premise of that is there's different like legends summoned throughout time.
Yeah, okay.
They're called servants, and then they have like a master that has them fight for the Holy Grail, and whoever wins the Holy Grail gets any wish that they want.
Yes.
Yeah, so I was thinking, how could something like this play out in a tabletop RPG? Because there's a lot of secrecy, there's a lot of like secret motives, like betrayals, like temporary alliances, and a lot of that wouldn't work in your traditional tabletop RPG setup because you could tell if someone's whispering to someone else, or
Hmm.
like it just like the environment doesn't really work for that. But if you do it through phones like inherently carry like a secretive
Yeah.
benefit to them in this way. So like, yeah, so it just allows for the game to play out in this really absurd, wonderful way. And when people play it, they love it, but it just is really trying to do something very different. And sometimes, like trying to do something different, it can be hard for me to sort of figure out a way to consolidate that messaging and make sure that it's easily understood by someone that hasn't seen that before.
Well, yeah, I mean, and yeah, I don't know. I was talking to another guy who is trying to kind of explore some different meetings of different mediums and do some interesting stuff, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, like you should kind of expect to have more screw ups than somebody who's doing something extremely well established. You know what I mean? Like, I think that at least that's my attitude. One of the parts of the Iron Age that I'm excited about and I'm trying to keep people encouraged about is like keep failing. You know what I mean? Like keep trying things, keep failing, keep moving forward. If don't you only like lose when you quit, kind of thing. And um, so I think that you're probably gaining critical knowledge on something that
For sure.
isn't maybe you haven't perfected yet, but I'm excited to see what you have lined up. I, before like okay, I'll come back
Mhm.
to Legendaria, but I want to ask you as far as new projects and new stuff that you're excited about. Do you have anything that you want to like kind of preview or tease about at all?
Yeah, sure. So in February, February 7th to be exact, on Kickstarter, we have our new board game coming out called Heartseeker.
All right.
Heartseeker is essentially an anime dating sim turned into a board game. The
Okay.
inspiration for this one is actually we played a video game called Helltaker, which is a very simple sort of like dating sim meets like puzzle game, and like a
Okay.
bullet hell
That's is
game.
interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and it was a really like fun game. It did really well for our streams. Like it was noticeably more well received in our community. So I made a fan made game of that, and like a fan made tabletop game of it. And then I tried to
Hmm.
contact the game designer behind the game. I never heard anything back from him, but my friends enjoyed the game so much that I made for that game. They were like, "You have to make this into an actual game, Vince. Like this is one of the most fun games we played in a long time." So I was like, well, it sounds kind of jokey, but I basically reskinned it, rebranded it, kind of tweaked some things, and that's what Heartseeker is. And so that's where the inspiration for that came from. And one of the fun things we got to do in Heartseeker is when choosing the characters, I thought it'd be fun instead of making all new original characters, is just borrowing characters from all of our other games. So I just like
Okay.
handpicked. Yeah, so like Legendaria has a bunch of legends. So we took Cleopatra from that game, and now she's in Heartseeker. But then we also have some characters from other worlds in Heartseeker. We have characters from Slingers in Heartseeker. So if you happen to
Uh-oh. We might have lost you there.
play some of our other games, you can start picking up. All right, can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, you seem to be back to normal now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, not sure what happened, but at least it worked out. But essentially, in Heartseeker, there's some familiar faces if you're playing some other Vindicated games, but if not, that's fine too. It's not predicated on you knowing any of these characters at all, I promise. So you can just pick up Heartseeker, have a good time. It's very simple. Essentially, the idea is you need to get 3 characters. If you get 3 characters before anyone else, you win the game. The way you get characters is by playing move cards. Moves have different icons on them, and if you each character has 3 corresponding icons, so you're just trying to match the icons up. There's also actions though that change the way the game's played. They can like swap people's hands. They can make you draw more cards, discard cards from people's hands, and then there's also favor cards, which is like an auto win. All right, I'm back.
Okay, there you go.
Okay. Hello. But even though favor cards are auto wins, anyone else can discard a favor card that they may have in their hand to cancel yours. So you have to use them in a timely, strategic manner, or else you can just get completely, we'll say, blocked and not be able to use your card. It's very simple to learn, but there's a lot of little nuances. All the characters also have different abilities. Some of them trigger whenever they enter play. Some happen whenever you gain the character. Some have abilities whenever they're in the lineup to get. So in the order that people draw cards and the way the characters petition. So I always try to make sure that I make.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, so I was saying that I hate repetition. So I always like to have a lot of variety in games I make. So for example, like in Slingers, every single spell in the game, there's only 1 copy of it. So there's more variability into what you'll draw.
Yeah, I do think that's a nice feature whenever you're dealing, especially with quick games that have a lot of replays. You know, it's like if I'm sitting down and playing like Terraforming Mars or something, it's like, yeah, I'm probably only going to play this like maybe 20 times in my entire life. You know what I mean?
I do notice too, before I forget, I have noticed that I have a tendency of going for designing card games that have more of a take that element to them. And I didn't really think of that whenever I was making games, but I think the reason for that would make sense that I have the competitive TCG background. So I'm used to playing, in a field where you would be very competitive one-on-one, where, you're not like holding anyone's hands. You're going very like, you have an opponent, you're going after them. But at the same time, I'm someone who, I love strategy and I love some of the more complex elements of things, but I also love being able to play games with a lot of my friends and like my wife and people that don't like super like depth heavy games. And there's just, I don't know, I feel like there's a right balance for me and a lot of my friends in that group. So that's just kind of how we stumbled upon the level of complexity versus simplicity that we have.
Gotcha. Well, I was going to say, I definitely think that you have to have much better game mechanics whenever you have shorter games. There's definitely some longer board games where if I start looking at it from kind of like an analytical angle, I'm like, yeah, actually, I think this is pretty broken. And the only thing saving this is the fact that it is a board game, because even as a computer game, it would become very obvious that it was broken. So that actually leads me into a question with like Legendaria. Have you considered like transitioning any of your games to like either mobile games or computer games or anything like that?
The option's always on the table. Of course, there's a lot of work involved to something like that. We've had some people offer wanting to make like an app or a mobile game of some sort before, but no one that seems super serious. There were people that I'm like, okay, like, well, tell me what you're talking about. Let's discuss this. And they kind of just dropped it, which makes me question why you bring it up in the first place, but okay. But yeah, it's not something that I think is very important as like the focus right now. Like, it's not something that I'm like, oh, this has to be done in this way. But I'm definitely open to having, a video game or a mobile app or whatever it may be.
Interesting. Cool. Um, Talking like transitioning a little bit away from what you're doing as far as the uh, like the broader tabletop and gaming, like I guess competitive card gaming and everything else that's been going on. I feel like in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of upheaval between, like in my world, I do a little bit more wargaming, and like with Games Workshop and Warhammer 40K, and then more recently with Magic the Gathering releasing their $1,000 card packs, and now more recently,
fake cards you have to add.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You can't even use them, right?
Yeah.
That's anyway. We can go off on that if you want to, but
And they're random.
yes,
Yeah.
but and then most like just very recently, there's the whole 1D&D slash, I guess it's the open D&D. Wizards of the Coast is revoking their licenses, or not revoking, but they're changing their licenses, and it's going to potentially impact a lot of indie RPG makers who have used the D&D mechanics. How do you have any thoughts on how the market has changed and where things are headed?
It's a very big question, of course.
Yeah, I was gonna say take any one of those pieces and we can go from there. I'm
Well,
kind of just freewheeling from here on out.
Yeah, I think funny enough, it's behaving like a lot of markets that I look at in the entertainment space at least, but probably outside the entertainment space as well, which is that you will have these giant companies buying up smaller companies and consolidating. So,
Mm-hmm.
in the video game realm, Microsoft bought Activision and Blizzard, so they now own, I think, Call of Duty, Destiny, Overwatch, Diablo, World of Warcraft, and like they're buying up tons of smaller studios and bigger ones. Sony's buying up studios to try to compete with them. So you have basically these two main video game studios buying up everything. And then on the tabletop side of that, uh, Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro are way bigger than any of their competitors, and they have pretty large competitors. Like by comparing my size to say Paizo, who owns Pathfinder, Paizo's massive compared to me, but Paizo compared to Hasbro is like the same distance in smallness. Yeah. And with what you said, with what Dungeons and Dragons is doing and updating their license and stuff, and that going after a lot of small creators, that is true. But it also could affect Paizo, which is their because they made Pathfinder off the back of D&D 3.5, and they use that same license, and they are Dungeons and Dragons. I believe their number 3rd competitor. So not only does it take out all the little guys and gravely affect them, but it also affects even some of their top competitors.
Yeah, and I mean, I know like there, just because something is patently absurd as far as copyright or patenting, doesn't mean that it can't be pursued and cost the target of that lawsuit quite a bit of money. I mean, I the one I always think of is Games Workshop, like tried to copyright shoulder pauldrons or something like that.
What? I did not know that.
Yeah, it was like, oh well, obviously Space Marines, they have shoulder pauldrons and you have shoulder pauldrons, so that means that's ours. And it's like, you do realize that the entire premise of Space Marines comes from Starship Troopers and Robert Heinlein, and like, you go back to a lot of what the 40K universe is. It's a mishmash of other people's ideas, which is fine. But then to, go out and start attacking everybody else who does perhaps even more original spins on your ideas has always struck me as unethical.
Yeah. Well, it's I think what we're seeing too is with these massive companies is that, and I think like, so for example, with Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro, I think they want, like, D&D in a lot of ways is already synonymous with tabletop RPGs. A lot of times, like I think I mentioned this earlier, but a lot of people don't understand what a tabletop RPG is, but if you say D&D, they know what you're talking about. And
Yeah.
so in a lot of ways they're already synonymous with that, but I think they want to be even more synonymous. It's like they brought on Xbox executives, or Microsoft executives rather. And there's another company, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Apple. Like they brought in some Apple execs, and they have all these people on their
Yeah.
board. So they're trying to like very much instill this sort of this massive taking of the market. But D&D already is, I think, like 70% at least of the tabletop RPG market. And I think that was as of a few years ago, and they've been only growing since then.
Yeah.
And whenever you're 70+% of a market and you're taking out your competition, that by definition is a lot of people like to think of a monopoly as, oh, it's just the one business and there's no one else.
Hmm.
But when you have that much of the market space, like if you look up the
Yeah,
definition,
absolutely.
that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, I think it's anything over 50%. But yeah, that's pretty wild. Do you think that D&D will suffer in terms of like player base or engagement or anything like that as it goes after people who've been creating content in that same vein?
So I think technically yes, they will suffer some. I mean, obviously there's already people that vocalized a lot of negativity towards them, and even with their Magic the Gathering stuff they did earlier, I believe it was that their stocks hit like massive lows. I think it's 40% hit, which is massive. But the thing is like people care so much about names. I realize like the
Mhm.
brand D&D is so powerful for so many people that, for example, my coworker, he knows that I personally had some of my own personal battles with Wizards of the Coast and stuff, and that's something I think he actually empathizes with, where he's like, "Oh man, it sucks they did that to you." And he went and bought a Dungeons and Dragons shirt, and I thought it was very interesting because I was like, I didn't know he played D&D, so I was like, "Hey, I didn't know you played D&D. Like, I noticed you got a D&D shirt on." He's like, "Oh, I don't play D&D," and I was like, "Oh, interesting. Why'd you buy it?" And he was like, "I just thought it looked cool. I just like it just seems cool to wear it."
Yeah.
So there's a level of like cultural significance that Dungeons and Dragons has had because they were like first in, best dressed. They have the most money. So, and I also have this theory too that whenever they started off, they were really cool because they resonated with people that sort of felt like they were outcast or counterculture or like didn't belong, and they really resonated with those people. But now it's so much of a big cultural thing that you can kind of come at it from either perspective. If you're sort of like the punk rock guy, you can watch Stranger Things and be like, yeah, I love Eddie, I love D&D, let's get into it. Or if you come at it from more of like you're a jock and you don't know about tabletop games that much, you want to get into it, you're like, all right, man, what's the biggest and best? It's D&D.
Mhm.
All right, let's get into it. So like no matter which way, if you're kind of more like for the cultural mainstream or you're kind of more of like a punk rock guy, it like has managed to capture both of those things. And with them trying, they've also just been trying to trademark everything like Magic. Magic, whenever they trademarked that name, they were trying to trademark just the name Magic, but they couldn't do that. They weren't allowed to because that was too broad. So they had to add the Gathering. That's why it's called Magic the Gathering. But if you notice, a lot of their marketing just says Magic, because they want to put it in people's heads that if you say Magic, people think Magic the Gathering, and they go after people that use similar terms that involve wizardry or spells or whatever it may be, because they want to capture every word that relates to magic. They went after Konami for using the word magic for Yu-Gi-Oh, because in Yu-Gi-Oh they had cards that were trap cards, they had magic cards that casted different spells. They went after them and forced them to change their name to spells instead of saying magic. So they very much were taking up this onus of owning that word, and that was back in the early 2000s. So I don't think D&D is going to die. I don't think it's going to burn in this fire and like people aren't going to support it. I think that currently there's a lot of uproar. I think it will affect their numbers and percentages. But they also have so much resource and so much money that it's like, it's almost like it feels like it'll be a few drops in the bucket for them, and I don't know. I optimistically want them to be affected because
Mhm.
I sort of have my own personal bias in all this. But if I'm trying to be realistic here, I think that there's just not really another RPG that people want to rally behind, and there's just like I'll put it this way. Okay, to relate it back to the Iron Age media. Okay, So we have the Iron Age movement, and it seems largely like it spawned from comics, correct? Like it would seem like that was
Yeah,
the
that I would say that was kind of like the one of the touchstones for sure.
yeah. And so and I appreciate you having me on your show and not limiting it to just comics because I don't believe it has to be limited to just
Oh,
comics.
certainly not.
Yeah, and I agree. But there are people that support the Iron Age movement and support indie comics, but they still support Dungeons and Dragons very vocally. And
Hmm.
so that to me is when things clicked in my mind where I was like, huh, okay, so in every industry, we can support indie, we can support like not the mainstream, but we're still supporting D&D, even in the Iron Age movement. And
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
yeah, so that's where I'm kind of wanting to sort of channel some of my energy to sort of be a voice in that. And it's like, hey guys, you don't have to support my RPGs. Like I get it, if
Hmm.
someone doesn't like the way that my RPGs play or how they look. I'm not trying to do this to say like I
I
just
don't want
want.
any of that weeb trash. No, I'm
If
kidding.
someone doesn't like what I'm doing, that's okay.
Yeah.
But I do think that it would be beneficial to the Iron Age movement that we at least find a tabletop RPG or a few tabletop RPGs,
A
um,
system, maybe.
yeah, a system or even mini that sort of embodies what the Iron Age stands for.
Hmm.
And I feel like that's reasonable and makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of my just to go off a little bit on my thoughts about things is that I've had several people actually approach me and be like, okay, so who's in charge of this Iron Age thing, and like what exactly is it? Who is in and who's out, and blah blah blah. And I'm always like, yeah, no. And like at the very beginning, I said I'm probably going to upset people by including more people or casting too wide of a net or making the definition too broad for people because everybody seems to want to draw these sharp lines and have in crowds and out crowds and so on and so forth. And my thing is that uh, my inspiration to make the site came from Razorfist and his rant that mentioned it, who's going to run basically alternative news sites and things like that. He made the comment of, or I think it was called "Become the Culture," and I mean, culture is not reading a book. You know what I mean? It's not
Mhm.
listening to a particular band. It's not playing a particular card game or D&D equivalent. You know what I mean? Or
Mhm.
something else. It's or reading a specific set of comics. It's all of those things. It's
Mhm.
a lot of things. And so I think that um, one of the things that is important for me to try and do, at least, is broaden people's horizons because people don't know what they don't know. And um, like I sort of became aware of a lot of the countercultural stuff for the first time within fiction with the Sad Puppies campaign, which was a Hugo Award um, type campaign run by Larry Correia. And so I was aware of that, but I didn't really think much about gaming until Gamergate. And then I didn't really think anything of comics because I'm not a huge comics guy. At least I wasn't then until Comicsgate. And so it's well and good to kind of take each one of these pieces and say, okay, well, these guys were wronged or this needs to be fixed. But it's another thing to actually put these things together and start building synergy between them. So,
I agree. And so that's part of my focus this year. It's been interesting because, Vindicated's been around technically for like 10 plus years.
mhm.
But when it started, I was living with my parents, I was going to college, and it actually started off more as a graphic design studio. So it was actually Vindicated Studios, and I was doing the
Okay.
logos. Yeah, I was doing the logos for people. So I didn't do my games until much later, and it sort of morphed into something after that. So in a way, it kind of feels like I wasn't really like at any current iteration of Vindicated until maybe 2017. But even at that point, I was still very fresh faced, didn't know what I was doing. And I basically didn't have much direction. I was just kind of going off of instinct. And this year has been much more focused. It's been much more about me sort of analyzing, like, what is Vindicated? What do I want it to be? Where am I going with this? That kind of thing. And trying to find a way to focus that energy and still stay true to like who I am and what Vindicated's been, but also like make it something very palatable and distinguished and move it forward into this year and beyond. And part of that is what I want to do with the Iron Age movement. And I believe in like what you're doing, and I like what you're doing. And what made me feel more comfortable with it, honestly, is I can't remember who, someone tweeted like, what is Iron Age? What is, like, they were asking for a definition, or they're saying it's a dumb term because there's no, they couldn't figure out what it was. And then you actually responded to that, whatever, I can't remember who this was, but you responded to it and you laid out what it meant to you. And I don't want to paraphrase it because I feel like I'll get it wrong, but I remember reading what you said, and that was exactly how I felt it should be. And if you had said something different, like if you had made it all about like a political thing or something, if you had made it like if you had just, it could have been easy for you to word it in a way to where I was not going to vibe with it. But the way you put it out and laid out like 3 bullet points, I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I think it should be too. So I'm like fully on board with trying to, pave a way for tabletop games in this space and try to make sure that we can support companies that aren't D&D when it comes to this. And I don't know how much it's going to take for people to let go of D&D. It's tough.
Well, and I think that, one of the propositions you kind of have to have is don't let go of D&D, but look at this, you know what I mean? And you got to do something a little bit better. And it's only through a certain amount of incrementalism that I think we're going to gain significant traction, at least at first. And that's one of the things I've noticed about a lot of these specific movements. I actually do remember the Twitter thread that you're talking about. I think I actually deleted all that because I realized the guy wasn't making good faith arguments and was just like trying to get a rise out of me. But regardless, the thing is that, like, purity testing and all of this anger and everything else, it's like, I think I was talking about common ground in that. And it's like, we do have common ground, and even if, if I have a buddy of mine who reads indie novels or writes indie novels and supports other Iron Age creators and stuff, and he still gets together and plays D&D on the weekends or something, it's like, I'm not necessarily whatever. I mean, it's probably, don't go telling you about how much better D&D is than, your pen and paper RPG or something like that, there's still courtesy and whatnot. But I think that a lot of people just aren't aware of alternatives. And there's one frustrating thing, because I've been thinking about wargaming, is that, with certain games, you have to have a certain volume of people in order to make it viable, and I think that's one place where, that's why D&D is so big, is that it's hard to find people using other systems because it is so big. It's kind of like what you're saying. It's like a self-fulfilling or self-sustaining reaction. It's like I play D&D because the only people I can ever find to play role-playing games are people who already know how to play D&D and they don't want to learn anything new. And then that cycle just continues and continues.
Yeah, for sure. And I hope that I don't come across, it's kind of tough to sort of measure. Like, I don't want to come across as like someone that's like trying to beat someone over the head, like, don't play this or play that. So yeah, I'm not. Hopefully, I'm not coming across that way at all.
It's okay. But I already before I did the interview, I took out my my old D&D book and I burned it. So I didn't want you to fly into a rage. No, I'm kidding.
Here's a fun fact. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I played Magic the Gathering competitively as a kid. It's a part of my childhood. I played a lot with my father growing up, and that's actually how I bonded the most with my dad. So there's kind of a weird thing there, like a weird spot. And then my dad, I mean, the thing that he gave to me, the sort of like passed down to his son before stuff happened with Wizard of the Coast and me, is a bunch of his old Dungeons and Dragons books. So now I'm holding on to all my dad's like very old school, like I have like 6 or 8 like old school D&D books, like first edition ones and stuff. And It's kind of a weird thing. I mean, I cherish it because it's my dad's. But also my dad supports me, and he's he's helped me out, when it comes to this, and he's in my corner, so I'm very thankful for that. But I get it. It's not like it's not like, I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm not like coming at it as someone who's like just completely hated D&D, has no connection to it whatsoever, and just wants to attack it.
Yeah, no, and I hear you there, and I feel the same way with certain different media properties. Not to dive into complaining about this, that, or the other, but I think that personally, what I've kind of resolved myself to is take like don't go out and burn your jersey or whatever because you're mad about something, but don't play with it. Set it aside, and then whenever the time comes, it's like that is a completed system. It is what it is. Like there's no reason that you have to engage with the modern thing. Companies change, people change, and products change over time. But like in a lot of ways, it's like, okay, you already have this section captured. Just do that. But I also think that one problem with saying like there's a notable faction of people who say, basically like don't consume new media, right? Or like basically everything good has already been written. Just go back and read the old stuff. Just go back and play the old stuff. Just go back and do the old stuff. And like that to me, I'm not saying that there's not really great stuff back there, but it's very hard to engage, and you're not going to be building anything new that people can be excited about if you're like, yeah, okay, you need to actually go back and read Solomon Kane. Like I love the collected stories of Solomon Kane, but I'm not going to say, oh no, don't buy this new author. Don't worry about doing any of that. You just need to go back and read, stuff from 100 years ago, which is, you still should maybe, but it's not necessarily as simple as either or.
Yeah, and I get that it could be easy for people to say like, oh, well, you ate at Burger King and they support this, or you buy from Xbox and they support this. I mean, you can really go down a rabbit hole where like everyone is supporting things that probably don't align with whatever you believe.
You pay your taxes? Do you know what your taxes are being used for?
Yeah. So it's just
right?
It specifically just resonates though in the sense of like, the Iron Age movement, and then seeing people saying like, hey, we need our own culture and to have alternatives to things, and it seems like that's just not explored in the tabletop space like at all.
I haven't really seen anybody else. There's a few people who I've talked to who are making kind of like the more complex board games, like the more Euro game oriented stuff, but you have by far and away made like the most like actual like bring to a party and play it kind of games that I've seen. And I always think that that's like those kinds of things people sometimes I think disregard because they like want to have some, and this is another reason why I kind of like short stories and things like that, is it's like, all right, well, here's a piece of candy. You know what I mean? You like that? Okay. It's easier to make like a good piece of candy than it is to make like a 7-course meal, for one thing. And so like a lot of people are like trying to make these huge franchises or these huge products, and it's like let's start out with like nice iterable things, and you can learn by doing the thing in its entirety, and then you can move on to the next thing and take what you've learned and apply it to that, and next time you're going to make a better piece of candy or whatever. But if you're trying to make a 7-course meal, you're still baking and you screwed up the entree and it's too late, but you got to just keep moving, and so it's like there's so many places where I see like I really like small entry points. So it's like, okay, this is only going to cost you 15 minutes. Let's just do it,
Yeah, and for me, just the way, I don't know why I'm this way, but if I play a card game or a board game, I normally don't like it to take more than an hour. And if it takes more than an hour, I want it to be a tabletop RPG. I can play a tabletop RPG for 6 hours straight. But it's like if I'm going to commit for like a very long-term session for something that's just very like it goes on and on and on. I love to have sort of that narrative, like role playing element. And when it comes to like making the whole like 7-course meal or whatever, that very much was what Otherworlds was for me. Is like that game probably has like 10,000 hours baked into just that game, and it was basically a lot of where the inspiration came from was for me as a kid. When I was like 7 years old, 8 years old, I was already writing down sketches and drawing stuff. And I used that as inspiration when I was getting older. And the mechanics I kept reiterating on. And I had actually written over 600 pages for Otherworlds, and I trimmed it down to under 200 because, in art, I went to art school, and they one of the sayings there is it's not finished whenever you can't add anything more. It's finished whenever you can't take away anything more. So it's not about continuously adding. And I feel like a lot of people that make board games, that's what they want to do, is they want to add so much things that it ends up being like a burden and not as fun.
It's like mechanics soup is sometimes what I feel like.
Yeah. So I've heard people tell me that I was very good at distilling things down to the most core fun element, and like having that be the focus and not like getting that muddied in the waters.
Yeah, and I think that's that's definitely something that I felt. There are some board games where it's like I think I talked about Terraforming Mars, but that game is just like it's a burden. Like I like it. I think it's fun, but it's like, my goodness, just by the time you set it up, it's a substantial time sink. And to play it, it's a huge amount. And sometimes the cards just screw you. And it's like, if I've spent an hour and I get screwed by a card, then I'm like, okay, well, we all had fun and we could do another one some other time. And it's whatever. If I'm like 3 hours deep in a, some kind of hellish game of Catan or something, and I draw a sheep when I needed a wood, I'm like, I don't ever want to play this game again.
Yeah. So
Lord help me.
Yeah. So I haven't played Terraforming Mars, so I don't have an opinion on that one. I know it's a pretty big game, though. I know like a lot of people like it.
Yeah. I mean, it's good mechanically, but it's a time sink.
I know a lot of people like Betrayal, the House of the Hill, or whatever it's called. That one's always recommended to play, and that one's also by Wizards of the Coast. And I played that one years ago, and so that game took like 3 hours to play. But what was even that's okay in itself. But what was worse is my character literally moved somewhere, then got teleported to the basement. The basement door got teleported away, and I was stuck in this basement for the entirety of the 3 hours, and no action that I could take could get me out of it or contribute to my team the entire time. And it was an awful gameplay experience. Now, apparently,
that's wild.
Yeah, apparently I heard that they fixed that in later editions. That's what I heard. I don't know if they did or not. But apparently it was like I assume it's a very rare circumstance because there's a lot that can happen in that game.
Yeah.
But that was my first experience and only experience of that game. So I bring it up whenever it comes to mind because that did suck to have that happen.
Yeah, and since I've gotten into wargaming, I'm like, if I'm going to sit down for a little while and roll some dice and do some stuff and engage in chance, like I want it to be like true chance, you know what I mean, with a set of dice, and that'll take a couple hours and that's fine. But yeah, I think that there's been some real crossover, or what would you call it, not necessarily crossover, but kind of like bleed over between tabletop and RPG and wargaming and all these other things. So it's and a lot of the smaller games have just kind of gotten neglected. But
yeah, well, I do want to. So that's another thing. I want to, like, to a lot of my friends and people I meet, they don't see, like, to board gamers, it's like, okay, cool, it's a filler game, and they'll say, well, Vince, for a filler game, this is a 10 out of 10, but because it's filler, the best it could be is a 6 out of 10. Like, I've heard people say things. Yeah. I've heard like people in the board gaming space say things like that. And I appreciate the 10 out of 10 for a filler game. That's really nice. But there are some people that like filler is used as a derogatory term, I feel like, a lot in this space, where I feel like it doesn't have to be. It's just a preference, So, like I say, a lot of my friends, my wife, a lot of people I know, they don't want their game to take more than an hour if they're playing a board game or a card game. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I don't think there's anything wrong if someone doesn't like that either. But that's just sort of where I'm at with that.
Yeah, and I think that not to say necessarily filler, but like if you're calling something filler, you're kind of admitting something about the other games, right? It's like the amount of time sink that you might have to have. But I think, like I said, I think that like low, what do you want to call it? Like low cost entry points, at least time
Yeah.
cost entry points are very important.
Yeah, and,
Um,
and real quick, I don't mind if someone calls any game I make filler, by the way. I think it's fine if someone wants to say that.
mhm.
I just there's certain times depending on how people say it, I feel like they're saying it as sort of like, like I said with the guys like, oh, well, for a filler game it's 10 out of 10, but for a
Yeah,
board
yeah.
game it's when it's like when it's kind of positioned in that way in particular. Otherwise, I've been trying to call them killer filler. It's like I make some killer filler games.
Okay,
So especially
that's
since
good.
yeah, thank you. I appreciate that because I haven't gotten feedback on that yet. But especially since I have Guillotine, which is our most recent card game. It's all like monster themed. So I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
cool. Killer filler. We got some monsters. Black Paper Moon also has a very like spooky vibe to it. We celebrate Summerween, so we do like a whole event for that. So Halloween is sort of like loosely tied with some of the stuff I do. Not for every project, but it keeps popping back up.
Hmm. So speaking of themes, I know that you have some uh, projects that you've done that are uh, based on certain animes and whatnot. Now, are those uh, are those games that you're going forward with? Are they just kind of like fan creations?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So I think the first thing that started was I did like a fan made Bunkers and Badasses thing, which has nothing to do with
Okay.
anime. But if you're familiar with Borderlands video game
Hmm.
series, they had a DLC called Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep, which is by far their most popular DLC or even Borderlands media. They'd even created their own spin-off game, which was not as good. But that's neither here nor there. I made a fan made version of that though. I just sort of saw an opportunity there, and I just wanted to kind of put something out there for people. And people really responded well to that. A lot of people liked it. We actually had CBR wrote an article about me in that, and I had no idea until like 2 years later. I was just searching my name, seeing what would pop up, and then so I got some credit points for helping create like Bunkers and Badasses into the official version. Even though I don't have an actual association with it.
Hmm.
But I was like, oh, it's cool that they wanted to, point me out with that. But so it started with that, and then I did one for like My Hero Academia, Yu-Gi-Oh, some other stuff. But obviously, there's only so far I can go with that because I don't own the IP, and
Hmm.
I make sure people know it's like, well, this is I'm not charging anything. Everything's there is publicly available, stuff like that. Just sort of my ideas for like how I would go about making it into a tabletop RPG, so people can sort of see like where I'm coming at it from a creative and mechanic perspective. But I can't. Maybe this was last year. At some point, it clicked in my brain. I was like, well, maybe it makes sense since there's all these people in my community now that met me from this, and they like this idea and these concepts. Why don't I just rebrand the IP? I mean, even similar to Heartseeker, how that was originally based off of a video game IP, completely reskinned it, and now it's completely my own IP. Why don't I do that for some of this other stuff? So we have something it's heavily inspired by My Hero Academia, and it's currently called Super Breaker. And that will be like
Okay.
it'll be like an anime superhero tabletop RPG. And then we have Black Paper Moon, which people associate with being inspired by Soul Eater. Though funny enough, the inspirations for that wasn't as direct as these other ones are. And that actually might work to my own what's the word I'm looking for? Like it might actually have been a
Detriment.
to my own thank you, my own detriment that I didn't try to mimic more Soul Eater inspiration in that. Black Paper Moon, the original inspiration came from me wanting a fun, silly Halloween tabletop RPG that you could pick up and play. And there's a lot of like horror-based tabletop RPGs, even a lot of simple ones, but there's not really ones that are meant to be like tongue-in-cheek. So I
Hmm.
wanted a very like tongue-in-cheek like Halloween experience, and so I released a PDF for it called A Bittersweet Trick or Treat, and that was a reward that people could get for signing up to my newsletter. And then over the years, I play tested it, tried it out here and there, and then last year, a project I was going to do wasn't seeming to pan out, so I needed to pivot. and then I pivoted to a bittersweet trick or treat. But the last moment, I was kind of going over it with some friends, and I mentioned changing the name to Black Paper Moon, and they said that they liked that. And a lot of people know Black Paper Moon is a song name for Soul Eater, and Soul Eater is just instinctually a like an inspiration to me, just because it's my favorite anime probably. So it just happened to sort of, and then we were going more focused in on the anime art style, whereas a bittersweet trick or treat didn't even have an anime art style. It barely had much art for it at all, but it didn't really have an anime art style at all. But since I've been focusing in on that, because that's sort of like my core audience, it's like, okay, well, instead of me changing up the art style between projects, it makes sense for me to sort of focus in the art style a bit more. So if you like one of my games, you can like the other one. And if you don't like one, you probably won't like the other one anyways. So let's focus that in. So we got new artwork. We called it Black Paper Moon. And then so everyone's like, all right, cool. It's a Soul Eater inspired tabletop RPG. And it didn't start off that way at all. But Soul Eater does inspire me a lot because it's my favorite anime. So it's I don't know. I kind of lost the plot, I think. I can't remember your question anymore.
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay, cool.
No, I'm happy to hear about it. Well, I would actually have kind of more of a technical question about your RPGs. Are there, am I understanding correctly that each one of them has pretty unique mechanics, or do you have like a common system?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. So we have two main systems that we use. We have one that uses what we call the Otherworlds engine, which is what Otherworlds uses. Actually, no, three. Okay, three. My bad. Right, the Otherworlds engine, which Otherworlds uses, of course. That's also what we're planning for the My Hero Academia inspired tabletop RPG to use. With that being said, though, there are some fairly fundamental changes because I don't like the idea of having one system that just tries to mold itself to everything. I kind of look at that as like Legos.
Reskin.
Yeah. And I get why some people like that, but to me, I view it like Legos. We're like, okay, you can build Lego Harry Potter, Lego Star Wars, Lego Batman, but at the end of the day, they're all like not quite Batman, Harry Potter, or Star Wars. You know, they're all kind of Lego still. And so I think it's great that those are modular, but I really want to have sort of that, like I need to make sure, like, if you play the My Hero Academia inspired one, it feels like you're actually living in that universe, and like you feel like a hero, and you feel like you can save the day. And what kind of mechanics and what kind of gameplay would that have? And ultimately, if a system I've already built cannot do that, I would make my own system for it, because I don't want to retrofit something just to save myself time, just to make it easy. But at the same time, if I do believe it fits very well, and I can just change some core rules but have everything else be the same, so we keep most of the foundation the same but we change some core elements to make it fit, then that's what I'm going to do. So Super Breaker uses the Otherworlds engine. Black Paper Moon uses its own engine named after itself, Black Paper Moon, or BPM. And then we have an RPG I'm working on that probably will not be out this year, but it's sort of inspired by an anime called Fairy Tale, which is sort of like this. It's like a wizardy anime, but they have like a lot of like Celtic, like Irish theme music and stuff. So we're kind of diving into the folklore of that. So it's kind of more of a lighthearted, colorful, fun wizard tongue-in-cheek type thing, and that would be more using the Black Paper Moon engine.
Interesting. Have you had any desire or interest in, because I know you said that Otherworlds is kind of more of a science fiction fantasy, and these other ones aren't necessarily kind of like your sword and board or sword and sorcery as directly. Have you considered making a system that would be more directly competitive with something like D&D?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So not necessarily. Trying to think of how to put this. For one, I feel like there's so many games out there that's already very much like D&D with everything but name and then like one change. And there's a lot of different flavors of just like sword and sorcery, like D&D type fantasy. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I just don't want to make a game in that setting unless I really believed I was doing something different in it. And normally I feel like that would include like a mix up in the genre or something that just makes it different enough from D&D to where people wouldn't see it as a direct competitor in that way. And also, since I've kind of went all in on the anime route, even if I made a sword and sorcery like D&D like tabletop RPG, just with it having the anime style wouldn't be enough for people that like people wouldn't just transfer one over to the other, you know.
Yeah, it would probably trip people up.
Yeah. So I would have to like make sure the art style was very similar to D&D. I'd have to make sure the mechanics seemed similar and stuff. So, you know, I feel like, you know, Paizo's already there with Pathfinder. I feel like there's probably like other decently sized tabletop RPGs with it. And then there's also like I think there's ones called like Tunnels and Trolls is one, which is a very, like a smaller version of like a D&D type experience. So I don't know. I mean, it's really just what inspires me ultimately at the end of the day. I mean, maybe I'll feel inspired. There's kind of a RPG idea I had recently that was inspired a bit by Goblin Slayer, which is a tabletop, or sorry, an anime that is more in that, you know, fantasy vibe where it's all about just killing goblins. And yeah, and there's a fun idea I have sort of with that would use the Black Paper Moon system, but we'll see.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have coming up in the next year. Are there any creators that outside of the tabletop industry, as far as like indie creators or anything that you've got upcoming collaborations with, or anything that you're excited about in kind of the Iron Age space?
Yeah, so hopefully this year I'm wanting to network more with different people. The challenge is I don't know if I'm just not seeing people or if they exist or what, but when it comes to the tabletop space, like I said, I can't really find people that seem to be similar minded in the tabletop space. In the comic space, I've reached out to people, and there are some people I'm working with in the Iron Age comics area, which is awesome. I know that JVP, who does Ruthless, him and I are working on something together, which is fun. Yeah, so hopefully he doesn't mind me saying that. It's so I think it's fine. But him and
we'll
I
bleep it out if he says if he objects.
Okay, cool. I think he'd be cool with it. But him and I are working on a little something together. But there's a lot of people I've reached out to in the comic space that say, hey, I do comics and my audience is comics. I don't think they'd be interested in anything tabletop oriented. They feel like it's too much of a different space. So it's a bit unfortunate, but we'll see, where that goes. Last year, I collaborated with some different people. Like I collaborated with a painter that lived in Sleepy Hollow, Pennsylvania. And I really liked his art style. So, I did some cool guillotine themed cards with him, and someone who loves Halloween, and they were promoting guillotine. So there's them, It's a Charming Life, and Spooky Little Halloween. So I was kind of like collaborating with these fun like Halloween outlets and stuff. But I'm open to, I like the idea of collaborating with tons of creators in any creative space. I think it's fun to see like what we can come up with and what we can do. I do hope to meet other people in the tabletop area space that seems to vibe with like some of the stuff I've said and wants to work and help promote each other and work with one another. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm currently at.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that like I've kind of alluded to, I'm a big believer in trying to get multimedia approaches, so that you can bundle these things, because sometimes, and I don't want to necessarily call out anybody, because it is in a way like you're meeting your consumers' needs. It's like some of these some comics have like 3 or 4 different covers, and it's like for these different pledge tiers you can get all of them, and it's like I understand some people are buying them for reselling and stuff like that, but I mean the point is that there's still collectors who are out there. So I'm glad that people are meeting those needs, but I also wonder about, it's like, okay, you have like 5 different covers now. I mean, what about a simple card game or something, you know what I mean, something else, whether it be a tabletop game or a music album or just something, a set of short stories, whatever. There's a lot of people who I think are all working towards similar goals. And, one thing that I've tried to say about the Iron Age or I've tried to clarify kind of after the fact, is that I don't necessarily claim to be like coming in. I don't necessarily think that, oh, the Iron Age was spoken and here it is, and everybody. No, it's all these people, yourself obviously included, who've been working towards these things for a long time. And the Iron Age moniker is just kind of like a rallying cry in my mind to help people network and meet each other and put these things together. So I hope that that's what we see in this next year.
Yeah, I hope so too, because obviously there is a lot of support just in general, like that I see, and I think that's awesome. And I do see a lot of friendliness and stuff, which is great. One thing that's interesting is talking about someone making comics and not making a card game and stuff. I mean, on one hand, it is difficult. I've learned to try different medium, because I actually tried to make a comic last year, and I was like, okay, because notice we're Vindicated Entertainment, we're not Vindicated Games, so I very much, I started off with the mindset of wanting to, I mean, most people would know us for the games, especially tabletop games, but I, like I said, I've dived into comics, and I still have that artist and writer that I have on the back burner, and we kind of, we still talk, so there's still possibility there. And also we released a chapter of a manga last year, but then it turns out that the progress of that was a bit halted. So I was like, okay, we need to make sure this is all laid out prior, but we have a manga in the works too. So we have the comic, we have a manga, we have the tabletop games. And also in the tabletop space, I realized I had no idea whenever I was getting involved in tabletop games that the tabletop space, even though I refer to it as one thing, it's segmented in itself. Like trading card game players normally normally if they play Magic, they don't want to play anything else. People that are really about Magic don't care to even try my games. People that are really into board games, like I said, they tend to be kind of more in the Euro style games. They don't want to play TCGs typically. A lot of them don't want to do tabletop RPGs, but a lot of them still play that. But there's like certain things that they don't like, and then it's like everything's very segmented to the point where I've had people tell me, they're like, wow, that's so unique that you're making tabletop RPGs and card games. Like the fact that I'm not just making, they're like, you're not making just tabletop RPGs or just card games, you're doing both. And in a way, unfortunately, it's kind of a detriment, because there are certain people that might only like what I do for tabletop RPGs, and so if half the time I'm bringing out card games, they don't care, or if they care about the card games, they might not care about the tabletop RPG. So it is really tough to try to like create sort of that, like to be more than just that one thing. But I do, you brought up things about culture and culturally and stuff, and that's something that's been on my mind, is I want it to feel almost like I just want it to feel cool to be Vindicated, like I just want it to feel like almost like a way that certain people could just sort of like live and just be. And so I want to try to create some of these different elements of entertainment, and it doesn't all have to be me either. Like I would love to be able to promote other people's work that are doing, because there's only so much I can do, but if I can share other people's work where they're making comics or they have their own cool, like even coffee brand or something, and we can network and work together, where it's like, all right, cool, so every morning you drink that guy's coffee, he's got my back, I got his, we're creating cool stuff, I got these tabletop games, if you want to play a killer filler card game, you can play this card game. And like, just having it where like everyone's covering different aspects, and we all kind of have this awesome community, this awesome support, and we're all there for each other. Like that's ultimately like where I would love things to be.
Yeah, and I'm not going to keep you for too much longer, but I will say that I think probably the thing that I'm going to keep harping on, and it's only January, so I think some people are probably already sick of me saying this, but collaboration, man, like collaboration is not collectivism. It is like you can be individuals, and like collaboration is how individualists win against these big groups that don't have their best interests in mind. So I'm all about trying to promote collaboration and promote people finding each other, because you never, like, just like we were saying, you're never going to be the biggest fan of and like super involved in every single different medium. Everybody is a bit of a scrub at something. So if you want to support like a whole culture, it's nice to have these things together and connected in a way that you can actually discover them.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting too, because like even though I love collaborating, it's kind of something a bit newer to me because I'm so used to sort of being outside the norm or outside the space where it's like, okay, I'm just going to put my head down. I'm going to just do my work and I'm going to do what I'm going to do, regardless of what anyone tells me. And, that helps me succeed in some ways and get things done, accomplish things. And I'm still going to, get things done and be that way. But I've also had to learn, it's like, okay, Vince, you can't do everything by yourself. Like you need,
Yeah.
like it can help to collaborate, to talk to other people, to really be involved with other people. So it's been an interesting balance to try to do, to kind of do both, I guess, to really like focus on myself and work really hard, like still achieving what I need to do, independent of what anyone else thinks or does, but also being very open and wanting to support and being like collaborative with other people. Because I do think that's been a thing holding me back because they said it's the expression of it's like who it's like not what you do, it's who you know. And so it's like, well, I'm not really getting to know a lot of people if I'm just sitting here like just doing everything my own way all
And
the time.
that's another important aspect of it. Well, I don't want to keep you too much longer. Thank you so much for talking to me. Is there anything you'd like to close out with aside from, and I was going to say, and please make sure that you repeat your teaser for Heartseeker.
Yes.
And
so
just take us away.
All right, cool. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Anyone watching, if you would wish to reach out, I love talking to people. I love discussing ideas, so feel free to do that. We can talk about literally anything. On top of that, we have Heartseeker coming in February. We're about to drop our new trailer for it, and it looks amazing. We also have Black Paper Moon, which was on Kickstarter. That's coming in, should be early this year. So it should be arriving. Might take a couple of months. There's been delays with shipping and stuff, but if you're on the lookout for that, we're getting the box versions in. We also have the PDF available on our website, and we have a lot of other cool stuff on our website. If you want to learn more, check us out at vindicatedentertainment.com. It's where you can find everything. We have an awesome Discord community. We do Twitch streams. We have all the games listed there, all that fun stuff. So again, thank you for having me. And hopefully I can hear from some of you guys and maybe we can collaborate or just have fun talking.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to it. And you guys will be seeing more about Vindicated Entertainment on Iron Age Media.